When an avoidant disappears whenever the relationship requires emotional responsibility, that is the first and clearest sign you are not dealing with a communication issue. You are dealing with an emotional capacity issue. Because emotional responsibility is the backbone of a real relationship. It's the willingness to stay present when things get uncomfortable. It's the ability to hear your partner's feelings without running. It's the courage to repair after conflict instead of retreating into silence. And if their default response to emotional moments is withdrawal, you will spend the entire relationship trying to pull a person toward you who is wired to move away. This doesn't usually start as a big dramatic exit. It starts as patterns that feel small but cut deep. You bring up something important and they change the subject. You ask for clarity and they say, "I don't want to talk about this right now." You express hurt and they become cold, quiet, or defensive. You ask for consistency and they say you're asking for too much. You ask where you stand and they say they're confused. And the most damaging part is what happens next. They leave you with silence. Sometimes they disappear for hours, sometimes days, sometimes weeks emotionally even while they're physically around. They shut the door the moment feelings become real. And because you care, you start adapting. You start speaking softer. You start choosing the right time. You start reducing your needs. You start editing your emotions. You start trying to be easier so they don't shut down. But every time you shrink, you teach your nervous system that love requires self-abandonment. You begin to associate intimacy with anxiety. You start walking on eggshells, not because you're dramatic, but because the relationship has trained you that honesty triggers withdrawal. Avoidants often don't see their withdrawal as harmful. They label it as needing space. They might even believe they're being mature by avoiding conflict. But space is healthy when it comes with communication and return. Withdrawal is harmful when it becomes punishment or avoidance. The difference is simple. A healthy person says, "I'm overwhelmed, I need an hour, but I will come back and talk." An avoidant pattern says, "I'm overwhelmed," and then disappears without timeline, without reassurance, without repair. One builds safety, the other destroys it. This is why this keynote is game over, because a relationship cannot heal without repair. Love without repair turns into resentment. And when someone keeps disappearing at the exact moments you need connection, you begin to feel alone inside the relationship. Not single, but emotionally abandoned. You might be together, but you're not held. You're not met. You're not partnered. You're surviving. And the cruelest part is that their disappearing often triggers you to chase. You reach out because silence feels like danger. You send messages to fix it. You try to calm them. You try to restore connection. But the chase becomes fuel for the pattern. It tells them they can withdraw and still keep you. It teaches them that their silence has power. And it teaches you that your peace depends on their response. That's how the dynamic becomes addictive. Painful withdrawal from them, relief when they return, panic when they fade again. It becomes emotional conditioning. A person who disappears whenever emotional responsibility is required is not showing you that you need to communicate better. They are showing you that they cannot tolerate emotional intimacy. And if they cannot tolerate emotional intimacy, you will never feel consistently safe. Because every time you try to deepen the relationship, the thing that deepens it will also trigger them to run. The relationship will stay stuck at a surface level, or it will swing between closeness and distance, and you will pay for it with your nervous system. Now, can this ever change? Yes, but not through your love alone. Not through your patience alone. Not through your perfect words. It only changes when the avoidant takes responsibility for their pattern, gets help if needed, and proves over time that they can stay present through discomfort. And until that happens, your love becomes a negotiation with someone's fear. So the most powerful thing you can do is stop normalizing disappearance as just how they are. Love is not supposed to feel like waiting for someone to come back from themselves. Love is not supposed to feel like your needs are a problem. If they disappear every time you need a real conversation, it's not a phase. It's a forecast. And the longer you stay, hoping it will change without them doing the work, the more you will lose yourself, trying to keep a connection alive with someone who keeps leaving the moment it becomes real. When an avoidant returns only when they miss the comfort, not when they're ready to repair, you are no longer in a relationship, you are in a cycle. And cycles are addictive because they feed on hope. Every return feels like a new beginning. Every message feels like the breakthrough you prayed for. Every moment of warmth feels like proof that love is still there. But the truth is, a return without repair is not love coming back, it's comfort coming back. And comfort is the one thing an avoidant will seek, even when they're not emotionally mature enough to keep you. This pattern usually has a predictable rhythm. They withdraw when intimacy rises. They disappear when accountability is required. They go cold when you bring up needs. You feel the distance, you hurt, you try to talk, you may chase. Then eventually you detach. And here's where it flips. The moment you stop reaching, the moment your energy changes, the moment you become quieter and less available, they reappear. A meme. A miss you. A nostalgic memory. A soft message late at night. It's just enough to reopen the emotional thread, and because you've been starving for connection, you respond. You soften. You hope. But notice what's missing: ownership. There's no clear apology that names what happened. There's no acknowledgement of impact. There's no plan for change. There's no conversation about how trust will be rebuilt. There's no consistent behavior after the first warm moment. It's a return without structure. It's a return that asks you to pretend nothing happened, because pretending is easier than repairing. And when you accept that, you unintentionally teach them that they can keep you without growing. This is why the return is often timed around their loneliness, not your healing. They reappear when they feel empty, when they miss attention, when they're bored, when their ego needs reassurance, when someone else didn't work out, when they sense you're moving on. Your presence becomes emotional relief. Your availability becomes their calm. They don't always do it with malicious intent, but the effect is the same. You become a comfort supply, not a partner. The hardest truth here is this: missing you is not the same as valuing you. An avoidant can miss you and still avoid accountability. They can crave your warmth and still resent your needs. They can want the emotional benefits of you, while rejecting the emotional responsibilities of commitment. They can love the version of you that asks for nothing. They can return to the version of you that forgives quickly. But that's not a healthy relationship. That's a transaction where your softness buys their comfort. And it gets worse if you keep rewarding the return. Because each time they come back and you accept them without repair, the pattern strengthens. The avoidant learns, I can leave and still be welcome. I can give crumbs and still receive full access. I can reset the relationship with a message. You learn the opposite, I must accept less or I'll lose them. You start lowering your standards to keep the peace. You stop bringing up needs, because you don't want to trigger another disappearance. And now you're living in emotional fear, managing the relationship by shrinking yourself. That is game over for your self-respect. This keynote is also why closure conversations can become traps. You think if you just talk one more time, if you just explain properly, if you just get them to understand, it will finally change. But many avoidants use conversations as a pressure release valve. They let you speak. They give you enough emotion to calm you down. Then they retreat again. The conversation becomes their way to manage you, not their way to repair with you. So the only way out is to make one thing non-negotiable. Access requires repair. Repair means clear accountability. It means they name what they did, not what you made them do. It means they acknowledge impact. It means they ask what you need. It means they offer consistent behavior over time, not one emotional night. It means they don't punish your boundaries, they respect them. And if they can't do that, then the return is just a reset button for the cycle. A relationship cannot survive on returns. It survives on consistency. So if an avoidant only comes back when they miss comfort, but disappears the moment intimacy requires responsibility, it's game over because you are being kept in emotional limbo. And limbo is where your peace dies slowly. The moment you stop confusing their return with repair is the moment you stop being controlled by hope and you start being guided by reality. When an avoidant punishes your boundaries, that is the moment the relationship stops being a relationship and becomes a control dynamic. Because boundaries are not attacks, boundaries are self-respect. A boundary is simply you saying, "This is what I need to feel safe," or "This is what I will not accept anymore." In a healthy relationship, boundaries might create discomfort, but they create clarity. A healthy partner may not love hearing them, but they will try to understand them. They will negotiate respectfully. They will not retaliate. But when an avoidant punishes your boundaries, they are telling you something dangerous. Your self-respect is a threat to their comfort. Punishment can look loud or quiet. Sometimes it's an explosion, anger, accusations, harsh words. You're controlling. You're dramatic. You're acting crazy. But more often with avoidance, punishment is cold. It's silence. It's distance. It's withdrawal. It's the sudden shift in energy where you can feel the message without a single word. If you don't behave the way I want, I will remove my presence. That's not a mature response. That's emotional conditioning. For example, you finally say, "I need consistent communication." And instead of responding with understanding, they vanish for 2 days. You say, "I can't do hot and cold anymore." And they act offended. "Fine, maybe we shouldn't talk at all then." You say, "I'm not comfortable with you disappearing and coming back like nothing happened." And they flip it. "You're always starting problems." You say, "I need reassurance when you need space." And they punish you by giving you even less reassurance. What they're doing is training you to stop having needs. They're making your boundary feel like the reason you lose them. This is why this keynote is game over. Because once boundaries are punished, you stop being honest. You start choosing words carefully. You start swallowing feelings. You start tolerating behavior you shouldn't tolerate. You start walking on eggshells, hoping to keep them calm. And that's the slow death of a relationship. Not because love disappears, but because you disappear. Your voice gets smaller. Yours gets softer. Your needs become shame. You begin to associate self-advocacy with abandonment. And that association can destroy your confidence far beyond this one relationship. Avoidants who punish boundaries often do it because boundaries remove their power to regulate closeness. They are used to controlling the distance, deciding when they respond, when they withdraw, when they return. Your boundary threatens that control. It says, "You can't just disappear and still have full access." It says, "Your comfort is not more important than my emotional safety." And if they are not emotionally mature, they respond like a child who lost control. They sulk, withdraw blame, or create drama to make you back down. Another form of punishment is guilt. They make you feel selfish for having boundaries. They say, "After everything, this is how you treat me." They act wounded. They play victim. They turn your boundary into cruelty. This is a powerful tactic because caring people hate feeling like the bad guy. So you soften, you explain, you over-clarify, you reassure them. And suddenly the boundary disappears, and they get their comfort back, without changing anything. That's how punishment works. It doesn't need to be violent. It just needs to make you retreat from your standard. Here's the truth that sets you free. A person who genuinely values you will not require you to betray yourself to keep them. If you have to abandon your boundaries to keep the relationship is not safe. If you have to accept inconsistency to be loved, that is not love, that is emotional scarcity. And scarcity makes you desperate. Desperation makes you settle. That's why punishment is so damaging, because it keeps you in survival mode. The only way to respond to boundary punishment is calm firmness. You don't argue. You don't chase. You don't beg them to understand. You keep the boundary. Because boundaries only work when they are enforced. If they withdraw to punish you, you don't reward that with pursuit. You let the silence reveal the truth. You let their behavior answer whether they are capable of healthy connection. And if every boundary you set is met with coldness, guilt, or withdrawal, then it's game over because the relationship is teaching you the worst lesson possible, that love requires you to be smaller. And you were not made to be smaller. You were made to be respected. When an avoidant rewrites history to avoid accountability, that is not a difference of perspective. It's a survival strategy that slowly destroys your reality. Because a relationship can survive distance. A relationship can survive conflict. A relationship can even survive mistakes. But a relationship cannot survive when truth becomes negotiable. The moment your lived experience is constantly minimized, twisted, or dismissed, you stop feeling safe. Not just emotionally safe, mentally safe. You begin questioning yourself. You begin doubting your memory. You begin wondering if you're the problem for having normal feelings. And that's when the relationship becomes game over. Because you're no longer building love. You're fighting to keep your sanity. History rewriting usually doesn't start with obvious lies. It starts with language that sounds reasonable. It wasn't that bad. You're exaggerating. You're too sensitive. You always take things the wrong way. That's not what happened. Why both messed up? It sounds like fairness. It sounds like balance. But watch the pattern, it always lands in the same place. They never fully own their part. They turn your pain into overreaction. They turn their withdrawal into needing space. They turn your boundaries into controlling. They focus on your tone instead of their behavior. And slowly, the conversation becomes less about repair and more about protecting their ego. This is a crucial point. Accountability threatens an avoidant's self-image. If they admit they hurt you, they have to feel guilt. If they feel guilt, they have to be vulnerable. If they're vulnerable, they fear being judged, rejected, or losing control. So instead of stepping into responsibility, they change the story. Not necessarily because they're evil, but because they're terrified of the emotional discomfort that comes with owning impact. Rewriting history becomes their way of escaping emotional responsibility while still keeping access to the relationship. And it works, especially on empathetic people, because you're willing to self-reflect. You're willing to take responsibility. You want to be fair. You don't want to be the crazy ex or the dramatic partner. So when they say, "We both made mistakes," your mind immediately starts scanning your flaws. You start listing what you did wrong. You start apologizing for your reactions, even when those reactions were normal responses to their inconsistency. You start softening your truth to make the story feel balanced. And that's where you lose yourself. Because now your boundaries are built on guilt, not clarity. Rewriting history also keeps the avoidant in control of the relationship. If they can make you uncertain, you will keep trying to fix things. If they can make you doubt yourself, you will keep proving yourself. If they can make you feel like you're asking for too much, you will ask for less. That is how the relationship becomes comfortable for them and miserable for you. They don't have to change, because you keep adjusting downward. It shows up clearly in the aftermath of conflict. You try to talk about what happened, and they change the topic to your delivery. You were rude. You came at me. You're always negative. Now the focus is not on why they disappeared, why they shut down, why they ignored you. It's on how you reacted to being ignored. That's a trap. It turns the consequence into the crime. It forces you to defend yourself instead of holding them accountable. And once you're defending, you're emotionally engaged again, and they get to stay avoidant while you do all the emotional labor. A healthy partner can say, "I see why you felt that way. I didn't handle it well. I'm sorry." An avoidant who rewrites history cannot tolerate that kind of ownership, so they minimize, deny, or blur. They might even use a calm tone that makes you feel irrational for being hurt. But calm without empathy is not maturity. It's distance disguised as logic. This is why it's game over. Because if your reality is constantly questioned, you will stop trusting yourself. And when you stop trusting yourself, you become easy to keep in limbo. You become easier to breadcrumb, easier to manipulate, easier to silence. The way you protect yourself is refusing to litigate your reality. You stop debating the past with someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. You state your truth once. You hold your boundary. You don't beg to be believed. You don't write essays to prove your feelings. You let their refusal to own impact be the answer. Because someone who loves you won't need to rewrite history to keep their ego clean. They will be willing to get uncomfortable to make you feel safe. If an avoidant does these 4 things consistently, the 5th keynote is the reality check that protects your future. Game over doesn't mean you hate them. It means you stop negotiating your dignity. Most people hear game over and imagine anger, revenge, coldness, or dramatic exits. But the real meaning is calmer than that. It's a decision. It's the moment you stop trying to love someone into emotional maturity. It's the moment you stop using hope as a strategy. It's the moment you accept that chemistry and longing are not the same thing as safety. And you choose yourself even if your heart still cares. Because in avoidant dynamics, what keeps you trapped is not the lack of love. It's the lack of consistency mixed with just enough hope. You remember the good moments. You remember the softness. You remember the rare times they opened up. And your mind starts building a future out of those rare moments, as if they are the real relationship. But the real relationship is the pattern. The real relationship is how they treat you when you have needs. The real relationship is how they respond when you set a boundary. The real relationship is whether they repair or disappear. So this keynote is the moment you stop focusing on who they can be and start facing who they are being right now. Game over is you recognizing that your nervous system has been living on alert. You've been monitoring tone, response time, distance, mood shifts. You've been managing intimacy like it's a fragile object that could shatter if you speak too honestly. You've been editing yourself. You've been swallowing needs. You've been calming them down while you stay dysregulated. That isn't love, that's survival. And if you stay long enough in survival, you start calling it normal. You start calling it just how they are. You start calling your pain too sensitive. You start shrinking to fit their comfort. And this is exactly why game over becomes necessary. Because the longer you negotiate your dignity, the more you teach yourself that you are not worth protecting. Game over is also about accepting what you cannot change. You cannot talk someone into accountability. You cannot beg someone into consistency. You cannot love someone into emotional safety. Those things are choices. And if someone repeatedly chooses withdrawal over repair, repeatedly chooses comfort over commitment, repeatedly chooses avoidance over honesty, then the relationship is no longer missing love. It is missing the basic ingredients of partnership. You can have deep feelings for someone and still admit they are not capable of meeting you in a healthy way. This keynote also clarifies the difference between compassion and access. You can understand their trauma, their fear of intimacy, their childhood patterns, and still decide you will not be the place they act those patterns out. Compassion does not require you to remain available to inconsistency. Compassion does not require you to accept emotional punishment. Compassion does not require you to stay in a dynamic that damages your self-worth. In fact, the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is stop volunteering your heart as a lesson someone refuses to learn. Game over looks like quiet power. It looks like you no longer chasing. You no longer explaining. You no longer begging for crumbs. You stop responding to vague check-ins. You stop accepting returns without repair. You stop having closure conversations that only reset the cycle. You stop offering emotional access to someone who keeps refusing emotional responsibility. And you do it without hatred, because hatred keeps you tied. You do it with clarity, because clarity sets you free. It also looks like rebuilding your identity. You go back to the parts of you that got paused. Your sleep stabilizes. Your appetite returns. Your mind becomes less obsessed with decoding them. You laugh more. You focus. You reconnect with friends. You build a routine that doesn't revolve around their attention. You start feeling proud of yourself again. And that pride is important, because it's proof you're not abandoning yourself anymore. The final truth is this: if a relationship requires you to be smaller to keep it alive, it is already dead in the place that matters most. Because real love doesn't demand self-erasure. Real love doesn't punish boundaries. Real love doesn't rewrite your reality. Real love doesn't disappear when you need a partner. Game over is not an ending you fear. It's an ending that saves you. It's the moment you stop calling inconsistency love, and start treating your peace like something sacred. And once you do that, even if they never change, you do. And that change becomes the beginning of a life where you are no longer begging to be valued, because you finally value yourself first.